In Live on Live today, I'm joined in the studio by Arancha Gonzalez, Executive Director of the International Trade Centre, which is dedicated to supporting small and medium-sized enterprises accessing international markets. You're very welcome to the studio, Arancha.
Thank you for the invitation.
Well, look, first and foremost, you've had a very long and very accomplished career in world trade, one could say, specifically within the World Trade Organization, but also within the European Commission. But first, tell us, what brings you to Paris this week?
Well, France and the International Trade Centre are co-hosting an event gathering trade and investment promotion organizations from around the world. We have more than 90 countries represented here in Paris. And they are gathered here because they want to figure out how to make sure trade works for the benefit of all. Not just for the 1%, not just for the big multinationals, but how can they work to help trade also support small and medium enterprises, women in business, youth startups, the rural farmers participate in international trade. What kind of ecosystem is needed in the 21st century?
So, this conference is taking place here in Paris, but is there any coincidence that President Emmanuel Macron is an avid supporter of entrepreneurship, that it all happens to be happening here?
Well, President Macron is pushing a number of ingredients that are very dear to the International Trade Centre. He's pushing for entrepreneurship, the digital economy,
Sure.
international trade, multilateralism. All of them are ingredients that are very close to our heart, in that we see them as opportunities for the smallest, even the micro entrepreneur, the young woman and man that are starting in business, to join the world economy and get more competitive, and through that get better revenues, better returns, contribute more to domestic growth, and through that contribute to making our economies more solid.
Now, at this year's World Trade Promotion Conference, 11 organisations have been nominated for awards, and we have a lot of listeners in Africa, and those shortlisted from the African continent include Egypt, Ghana, Mauritius and Nigeria. Can you tell us what criteria you look for in the winners of these awards? What are the things that make them winners?
So first, we want to reward partnerships, those that are capable of working with others to create ecosystems. Two, we want to reward those that make good use of information technology, of the digital economy. And we have a number of them with very creative solutions, like Ghana, for example, active in this space. And three, we want to reward those organizations that are working to promote the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, ensuring that through trade, we leave no citizen behind, so that trade contributes to the overall improvement of the economies. So watch this space. We'll be doing the awards tomorrow night, and there'll be plenty of good surprises.
Okay. Well, we'll definitely be keeping our ear to the ground on that. Now, let's just have a look a little bit back on your career. When you worked with the European Commission in the area of international trade, that included, if I'm correct, negotiation of trade agreements between the EU and Mercosur.
Yeah.
Iran, the Gulf Cooperation Council, among others. But let's have a look at Iran. Following the 2015 Iran nuclear deal, business delegations, also specifically from France as well, who I actually have personally met, flocked to Tehran, that was open for business after decades of sanctions and isolation. Now that the United States has pulled out of the agreement, and businesses that had begun trading with Iran have been, in most cases, forced to shut down their operations, what are your feelings on the move?
I think it's a mistake. I think what the international community, including the United States, did about 2 years ago is get Iran to discuss, to talk, to compromise, to get to a deal. And in exchange for that, and the deal was about limiting the nuclear capacities of Iran and making sure it would be used for peaceful purposes and not for war or aggression. And in exchange for this, the international community was to allow the gradual integration of Iran into the world economy. And I think this was a deal sanctioned by all members of the United Nations.
Sure.
So it wasn't just the idea of a few happy in a corner. It was a deal that the entire international community felt that it was worth pursuing. And I think still today it is worth pursuing because it is easier to contain, to limit the ability of countries to do bad if we do this together, and if we back this within an internationally agreed framework and with checks and balances, with inspectors that are going to go and check what's going on. And that is, in my view, going to work better than just simply trying to fix it unilaterally or on a country-by-country basis.
Sure, but the other thing as well is, I mean, a lot of people were shaken by the fact they said we can't afford to continue doing business with Iran because the American market is so much bigger. That really was a very strong signal that the US sent out to these people who were investing in Iran. But is there a way that you think that we can mitigate, say, the Trump administration's imposition of trade tariffs, like on EU countries and for various things? Is there a way to just kind of make it work, even though the US is kind of putting the gun to everyone's head these days?
Well, the reality is that the currency of international trade, the international currency, is the US dollar. And this is why, in my view, it is unimaginable that you can decouple the United States from the world economy, because the world economy is the United States, hence the dollar. And this is also this dollar domination that is good, is brought stability. It sometimes means that the US has a higher trade deficit than other countries because they have the supremacy of the currency. But it is not good when it is used in a unilateral manner, when it is used in a manner that renounces to the compromises that the US and others have made internationally.
And indeed, the bigger economies such as China, we also have, I mean, Iran itself and Russia are trying to actually move away from the dollar and say, well, we need to find another currency to do business in if the gun is going to be put at our head. But there's also, indeed, mentioning China, the escalating tariff war between the US and the Chinese. And it would appear that I don't know, this is just as an outsider, no economist eye, but from the outside, kind of looking in at this war between the two countries, it would appear that the Chinese economy can absorb the impact of tariffs much easier than the United States, like manufacturing industry, when they look for Chinese products to come in for especially things in digital or data things. So is there any recourse for mediation in this affair? Is there someone who can come in, like the WTO or some representative from people that you may know very well, who can just go, right, let's stop this and sit down, because it's just one, up, and they keep on ratcheting it up?
Well, a number of countries are trying to mediate between the two. There is a reality, which is a huge geopolitical rivalry between the US and China, and this rivalry, either it can be mediated by the system of checks and balances that we call multilateral system, including the multilateral trading system, or the rivalry between the two will take down the system in the fight. This is what has motivated a number of countries to step in and see if they can build a bridge between this G2. The EU and the EU Commission President, Mr. Juncker, went to China, spoke to Xi Jinping, then went to the US, spoke to Donald Trump. And he's trying to build the bridge. Japan, Shinzo Abe, has been to the US, and now he is in China.
Today, exactly. He's doing a 3-day visit. Yeah.
And trying to build this bridge. Canada is hosting a trade ministerial in Ottawa tomorrow and the day after tomorrow, bringing together 13 countries other than the US and China, precisely to try to find a way to bridge these two. The reality is that everybody realizes that it doesn't do any good, not just to the US or to China, but to anybody else, if this battle is just simply a battle of tit for tat.
Yes.
That what is needed is, if there is a problem, and I think there is a problem, let's sit around the table, discuss this problem, and come to a common solution.
On the issue of problems, now, could it be said, or can it be said, that President Donald Trump's policies on trade, whether you like them or hate them, he's actually forced the World Trade Organization to revisit its rules? And that's something that previous administrations have failed to do, despite politicians from all sides of the political spectrum have been crying foul for years when the WTO needs to revisit its rules. So, is there a positive side to Trump's kind of argy-bargy way of doing business?
I think the US president is right when he says that the rules of international trade have to be changed, that they have to be modernized and reformed. I think he is absolutely right. Now, the US is a member of the World Trade Organization. It's not as if the World Trade Organization was something extraneous to the US. The US has a seat at the table. So what I would hope to see now is the US actively playing to bring other countries around the table to start a negotiation. That is what would make sense once we have identified the need, that we put the solution to it. Rather than engaging into this tit for tat, I do it to you and you obviously will respond to me, that we sit around the table table and we discuss, what do we do with the digital economy? What rules do we need for trade and technology? How do we treat state-owned enterprises?
So these are the things that you believe also have to be really addressed if there's any renegotiation
Absolutely.
of WTO rules.
Absolutely.
So what, I mean, to date, indeed, if you could just give me maybe a bit more depth of what really are the list of complaints that we've heard of to date. What are the real main issues?
So we have a leftover agenda from the 20th century. You know, how do we make agricultural, the level playing field in agriculture a bit fairer, not distorted by agricultural subsidies that those that have money can pay. But we also have to now deal with a new agenda, which is the interface between trade and technology. What do we do with cybersecurity? What do we do with electronic commerce? It's today 13% of international trade. What rules do we want for electronic commerce? What do we want to do with data? And how do we protect data?
And the weaponization of data as well.
And data localization. Do we oblige every company to keep the data on a server in the country? Or do we allow the free flow? Under which conditions? What do we do with cybersecurity? How do we protect intellectual property in this more technology-driven economy? All of this is what we need to negotiate in WTO.
Okay, well, Arancha Gonzalez, I have to say we have run out of time. It was wonderful to meet you today and to have this discussion. And that's all we have time for today here on Paris Live PM. Thank you, Arancha.
A pleasure.